Tired of staring at screens?
Let audioread.com turn your reading list into a private podcast.
With just 2 clicks, convert articles, PDFs, emails, or any text into audio you can stream in Apple Podcast, Spotify, or YouTube Podcast.
Perfect for multitaskers, podcast lovers, and productivity pros. Use the web app, browser extension, iOS shortcut, or Android PWA to listen anywhere. No installation required.
Highlight, upload, or forward content, and Audio Read does the rest.
Audioread.com, or find the link in the show notes.
Hi, I'm William,
And I'm Kat,
and that makes this Info on the Go.
answering questions you want to know.
You know, Kat, it's been a minute since we've started back recording. We took a little break there.
A little break, just a little
Yeah.
one.
Feels good to get back into it.
Mm-hmm.
And you picked this one, and I found this to be really disturbing.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I just occasionally I watch true crime documentaries and stuff like that. And so this one I was like, wow, this guy was around for quite some time and had so many deaths under his belt. It was insane by the time he actually went to jail.
Yeah, I mean, this one was pretty wild. It was pretty out there too. So from the title, you probably already guessed what we're talking about. We're talking about Samuel Little, America's most prolific serial killer. All right, so I'm gonna try to introduce Samuel Little as a man who seemed unremarkable, but later confessed to 93 murders, and that made him one of the deadliest known serial killers here in the United States in the history of serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so why does this case really stand out? I guess it goes, we're going to talk a lot about the longevity of the crimes, the lack of detention, and how many victims still remained unidentified for decades. Decades.
Right, right. Yeah, no, a lot of these murders came out of, like, he was arrested in one place and a lot of these other trials came out while he was in jail, and he got more consecutive life sentences on top of the one he was serving. Um,
Yeah, I
it
mean,
it was insane.
this thing is going to be all over the place. I'm just going to forewarn you.
So he was born June 7th in 1940 in Reynolds, Georgia. Me and him share a birthday. Interesting.
Wow, should I be worried?
I don't have murderous thoughts
Okay, all right.
usually. Usually,
Am I good?
yeah, you're
Do
you're
you
good.
have murderous thoughts for co-host?
No.
Okay, all right, I'm good.
Um, His mother was a young, struggling woman. Accounts vary, but some reports suggest she may have been involved in sex work. Somehow a lot of these serial killers have a similar family background.
Yeah, either they were treated poorly at home or, you know, most of
Maybe
them,
witnessed things or was exposed to things they probably shouldn't have been at certain ages.
yeah, I mean, and I was going to say most of them start experimenting on animals way in their childhood. Like, I'm not going to get too graphic, but that is usually a sign.
Right. He claimed he was neglected and was primarily raised by his grandmother in Lorain, Ohio. And he described it as unstable, disconnected, and he never developed strong emotional ties to his caregivers.
Hmm. So I guess we'll kind of get into his early criminal behavior here. As a teenager, he really developed a reputation for petty theft and breaking and entering, burglary. He was arrested multiple times before reaching adulthood, and it was a pattern of defiance and disregard for authority. And it was this kind of started early on in his life, right?
Right.
And he spent much of his youth in reform schools, correctional facilities, and those are just places where you can kind of learn how to manipulate the system, right?
Right. And
Um,
his record eventually grew to include over 100 arrests during his lifetime for burglary, assault, fraud, and more. I mean, it was long. His rap sheet was long.
well, I can imagine just talking about 100 arrests. Dang, like how did he keep getting? There should
And
be a limit. There,
right. And notice how we didn't even touch murder in here. Okay, he had 100 arrests and none of them were for murder.
yeah.
Okay.
So, I guess you can take on this other part.
All right. So the first signs of violence and disturbing behavior, while theft and burglary were his first known crimes, violence emerged early. He assaulted women, often targeting vulnerable individuals like those in the sex work scene. Um, he showed an obsession with control and domination through strangulation, which became his signature method. Early attacks were sometimes overlooked or even minimalized because of the people that he chose. He chose people that he knew other people weren't going to be going to look for because of the type of work that they were doing.
Yeah, and oftentimes those people that are in, that sex work type deal are, they're arrested multiple times. They tend to disappear. Law enforcement really just doesn't, for whatever, they just don't really get behind it.
No, they don't. And that's what was really sad for me too, just watching the documentary. Like all of these murders were women and all of them, almost all of them were sex workers. And he does have a couple of survivors, but it's still not a good not a good look. All right.
Yeah.
The reports suggest he was fascinated by death and control from a young age, which, if you are neglected and that's out of your control, I can see where that kind of comes from. Obviously, not to that extreme, but I can
Yeah.
see where it comes from.
Most of the serial killers, looking at their biographies, at an early age, they really get fascinated with death and control. Like I was talking about mutilating small animals, like we'll have to get into the psychology of that somewhere down the road. But um, so Samuel, what do we want to call him throughout this episode? Samuel or Sam Little or Little? What do you want to like?
Um,
Let's
the,
call him Sam. So, Sam exhibited traits of a psychopath, duh. Um, Detachment, manipulation, predatory instincts, so detachment has the lack of empathy, shows little emotion and connection with others. Manipulation is able to charm and deceive, and sometimes even evade suspicion. The predatory instincts, deliberately choosing victims who were, less likely to be noticed, which were sex workers, addicts, transient women. And then, there's this big one here, compartmentalization, which he lived much of his life drifting from state to state, and that's going to be part of the reason why it was hard to catch him, right? He
yeah,
he he never really formed those lasting attachments, which kind of, well, it didn't kind of, it really made him harder to track. And his compulsions combined sexual gratification with violence, making strangulation both a practical and symbolic choice. Silent, intimate, and controlling.
right. Now, his early years highlight the intersection of neglect, early crime, and violent tendencies. Um, you know why not every neglected child becomes a serial killer. His life does show how repeated criminal behavior and unchecked violence and systemic blind spots can escalate into decades of unnoticed horror.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great recap. I would agree with that. And I guess we're gonna really kind of start to kind of dive into it a lot more here, but just be forewarned.
Right. Um, now the we're This man killed 93. He claims 93 people, and they've not even found all 93. All right. And that was across 14 different states. That was the big thing. That's why he was so hard to track. It was across, like we said, it was across state lines. It wasn't
19.
just
I got 19 total
you got
states.
19. Oh, there must have been more since the documentary came out then. 19 states. Pardon me.
No, you're good.
Mm.
So the way he chose his victims, it was most always vulnerable women, sex workers, drug users, runaways, and really those who were on the margins of society that, the law enforcement or most people just kind of tend to forget about, believe it or not.
Right. He purposely went for those women because he knew their disappearances were less likely to draw immediate law enforcement attention.
Many of
Mhm.
these struggle with poverty, addiction, which really made them less likely to have strong support networks, family members, or people they could reach out to, or people that could say, hey, this person's missing, or I haven't talked to this person in a while.
Right. People that weren't checking on them, right.
Yeah.
Um, so, and his victims were often women of color, particularly Black women, which also reflects the broader societal issue that we have neglect in investigating missing persons cases.
Murdering his victims was manual strangulation. He rarely used weapons. He admitted that strangulation gave him a sense of control and even sexual gratification. Strangulation it often left little obvious trauma, which meant victims' deaths were sometimes ruled as overdoses, accidents, maybe even natural causes. And the people that he's targeting, it really makes sense, if you're talking about overdoses or, maybe things went bad with this John. I mean, there's so
Right.
many different variables for him. And so the forensic invisibility here really kind of helped him escape suspicion for, like we said at the top of the show, decades.
Hmm. So why he evaded capture for so long? Misidentified deaths, and because many victims were labeled as drug-related deaths or undetermined causes, their murders were never investigated. And then, of course, there was the jurisdiction gaps. His crimes were scattered across the country, preventing police from connecting patterns, the
And
vulnerability.
I think, that jurisdiction gap, so jurisdiction gap, they didn't have the internet back then. So it wasn't like, it was, I don't even, you couldn't even fax anything.
No, not really.
So it
You
would be
you were
that
trying to
letter.
just go along with trying to get different police precincts across different states by snail mail or looking at newspapers. Or if somebody didn't bring it to their attention, like, hey, this is happening over here too. Do you got this?
Yeah, there was no such thing as a database for
Mm-mm.
crimes or victims, rather.
Right. And
Anyway,
then, of course, you got the prejudice against sex workers and drug users, which, meant their cases weren't pursued with urgency. The lack of forensic evidence. There wasn't any DNA, there was no witnesses, and strangulation murders were difficult to solve at the time. And his transient lifestyle and over 100 arrests for lesser crimes masked his true nature. He appeared to be just another drifter with a criminal record.
so Sam Little or Samuel Little thrived in the blind spots of law enforcement and society. He preyed on women who were often overlooked by society and most other people. He was able to kill undetected for decades. It was one of the largest bodies of victims in American history. So, okay, well, let's kind of get into some of his arrests, some of his escapes from justice here. So, as we talked about, he had a long rap sheet, but none of those were murder convictions yet, right?
Right.
So throughout his life, he was arrested dozens of times for crimes like theft, assault, shoplifting, fraud, drug possession, all the other stuff we named at the top. Um, his criminal record included over 100 arrests across multiple states. He was on probation, or sometimes short sentences, or they dropped the charges. And
Hmm.
these frequent low-level arrests really painted him as a career criminal and not so much as a serial killer. So law enforcement saw him more as a petty offender and not really a predator.
So they started suspecting of murder, but then released him. So in the 80s and 90s, authorities suspected him in several strangulation cases. For example, in 1984, he was arrested in Mississippi for murder but released after a mistrial. And in Florida, he was acquitted in another case after a victim's testimony wasn't enough to convict.
Wow, that's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah.
So you got a victim that's,
But he picked victims that aren't going to be believed or listened to because of the work that they were doing to survive or the lifestyles that they led at the time.
I could be a judge and see that. I could honestly see that.
So, several women who survived his attacks did report him, but without physical evidence, cases fell apart. Despite the clear patterns of violence, Little repeatedly slipped through the cracks.
So honestly and truly, you got all these women who are surviving his attacks, but they don't really have the physical evidence. And in some cases, they're really not going to go talk to law enforcement because, the law is looking for them, right?
Mm, yeah,
So the lack of communication, you know, with crimes spread across from different states, different police departments rarely shared information during this time. And like I said, there was no national database like there is today. So honestly and truly, there was really no way to link these cases. It was almost impossible to do so. And then you had victim bias, you know, sex workers, drug users, and transient women. They just weren't credible or, in the eyes of law enforcement or in the eyes of the law. And they were often dismissed. And sadly, their deaths really weren't prioritized either. Then you had the evidence challenges. As we talked about, strangulation really left minimal for forensic traces, which really made it hard to prove foul play. So many of these deaths were ruled as overdoses, natural causes, or part of the lifestyle that these people were living.
right.
So honestly and truly, the justice system at the time really wasn't equipped to handle or pursue someone like Samuel Little.
Right. Or even willing to pursue it because of the victim's
Yeah, I would agree with that
lifestyle.
100%. And especially when you're talking about black women too. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah, in the 80s and 90s for sure.
yeah, and there's no telling when his crimes really started to take hold either.
Right. So and the effect of these escapes emboldened Little, reinforcing that belief that he was untouchable. So he kept going. He kept drifting across the country, attacking and killing with little fear of consequences. And he was very confident in his ability to stay hidden in plain sight, which revealed more about the flaws of the system than his cunning alone.
So all right, so what we're saying here is there was weak interstate communication, which allowed him to be able to operate unchecked, right?
Right? The systemic blind spots, the prejudice against marginalized victims.
And yeah, all of that together really kind of was in Samuel Little's favor, right?
Hmm. And it's just truly unfortunate for the victims, the family of the victims that, some of them they're still looking for or trying to at least identify because of the time, the lack of evidence, the lack of anything having to do with these cases.
Yeah, his case really kind of underscores the painful truth that Many victims were just ignored, right? Because of the lifestyle they chose and the way society chose to see
Chose
them. Chose
chose
not to, not yeah, chose not to see them. Because if they'd have chose to see them, they would have been looking for them. So, choose my words correctly. The society chose not to see them.
right. So
Um,
now we're finally getting into the final capture and all the confessions.
yeah. So the arrest that finally stuck was in 2012, in September of 2012. Samuel Little was arrested in Louisville, Kentucky on a relatively minor charge. As he was extradited to California, where investigators had reopened some cold cases. And 2012 kind of opened up a DNA, DNA is kind of available. So they were able to check him for three unsolved murders from the 1980s in Los Angeles. And these were women who had been strangled and left in alleys or garages.
So one of the victims was strangled until she passed out and she played dead. And that was the only thing that kept her alive. And he threw her out of the car into trash, literally into where people just throw their garbage at. It's not even a legit landfill, nothing like that. It's just basically a ditch on the side of the road where people decide it's a good place to put trash. Um,
Dang.
yeah, and she was part of one of the trials to try to get him arrested, but some of the um either the lawyers or the prosecutors or anything like that for when it went back to trial never called her to tell her that there was a trial going on and that she needed to come in or anything. There was not a phone call, there was no communication, so that was part of one of the mistrials is she didn't even know that
Dang.
they needed her as a witness, as her testimony. And that was what was crazy to me. From the 80s until the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, up until the mid 2000s.
Yeah, I mean 2012, he's in California now. Um,
He was arrested in Kentucky and then had to be extradited to California.
yeah, and that was in 2012.
Right. So
Okay.
from the 80s to 2012, this man was at large.
Yeah.
You got the his life sentence conviction in 2014 of the for those three Los Angeles murders. And each case had gone cold for decades, but we finally got the DNA evidence tied him to them. And he received three life sentences without parole, and for many killers, that might have been the end of the story, but not for Sam Little. It was only the beginning of a chilling revelation. And he initially said that he didn't even start confessing at all. He still claimed innocence this whole time.
Before we get into the confessions, I say we take a break.
Sounds good. Hey, William, I think we should take a break.
Okay, let's do it. Hey, Kat. Old Glory, they've been operating since 1969, and they have over 300,000 items to choose from.
Wow. So we're talking like music or what are we talking about?
We're talking about music, sports, and pop culture gear. And we're not just talking about modern day stuff either. We're talking about bands like the Beatles, Metallica. They have hoodies, tees, gifts, and so much more.
Wow. Do they also do those old nostalgia TV shows?
Not just the TV shows, but the movies as well. And if you know that sports fan, they got you covered there too.
That's exciting. Do we have an exclusive code?
Absolutely, we do. It's called InfoGo. So check it out at oldglory.com. Use our code to get an exclusive 15% off. Don't forget, that's InfoGo, oldglory.com, or just click the link in the show notes.
Hey, William, do you get too hot at night?
Are you kidding? We live in Georgia.
Oh, right. Okay, me too. But I found the site cozyearth.com where they make bamboo bedding. It's cooling, breathable, and buttery soft.
Tell me more.
Well, they have a 100-night free trial and a 10-year warranty. And there's also free shipping on orders $50 and above.
Tell me you got an exclusive offer for our listeners.
Absolutely. There's 41% off site-wide with our code INFOGO. And remember, that's cozyearth.com.
Yeah, so make sure you use our code InfoGo at checkout to get that 41% off. So now that we're back, the confessions started in 2018, and they started while he was serving his life sentence. Samuel Little, he started talking to investigators, and he claimed responsibility for dozens of murders across the country, most committed between the 70s and 2005.
So
That,
so so wait. So wait. So he says he started in the 70s.
yeah, at 20 years old. No,
Right.
no, 70s. He was born in the 40s. He started at 30 years old.
Wow. So yeah. And then he still claimed his innocence when he went to trial and was convicted of three murders based on his DNA in 2014. And it wasn't until 4 years later that he finally decided to start coming clean.
Yeah. And check this out. At first, his story sounded really unbelievable. And so detectives, started to realize he was describing crime scenes and victims' appearances and small little details that really only the killer could know. And
Um,
over that time, during his confessions, he confessed to over 93 murders.
Yeah. And so the in the documentary of that victim that he threw in the trash whilst he was strangling her, he told her to she said in her interview that he told her to swallow, that he liked it when she swallowed.
But
Okay.
dang, that's
Yeah.
messed up.
Yeah, and then it went to him talking about her because he thought she was dead. And verbatim, that's what he told her. Over the course of that time, he eventually confessed to 93 murders, and that makes him the most prolific known serial killer in the United States history. I mean, that's more than Dahmer, that's more than Ted Bundy, that's
John Wayne
insane.
Gacy.
John, yeah, Gacy, everybody. I mean, way more
Yeah.
than anybody combined.
And he he had some pretty detailed accuracy too when he was confessing, his memory was he was able to recall faces, clothing, where he left the bodies, and we're talking decades from the time that he actually committed these crimes.
Yeah. And a lot of his victims had never been identified or had their deaths misclassified, like we said earlier. And so Little's details helped to close dozens of cold cases.
Yeah, so FBI agents were able to verify more than 60 of his confessions with independent evidence, making his credibility really undeniable. I mean, so he claims 93, only 60 have been solved.
Right. And did you know that he was drawing little portraits of his victims in prison?
No, that's crazy.
Dozens
Uh,
of women drawn from memory, even with vivid colors and striking details, their hairstyles, their jewelry, their expressions.
that's insane though.
Hmm.
Like that's crazy to be recalling that, we're talking he says he stopped in 2005. He was caught in 2014. We're talking 9 years later, and then we're talking a span of what, 35 years of killing.
Yeah. And the FBI released these sketches to help identify the unknown women. And some of their families recognized their missing loved ones through his artwork. That's what's even more re- insane.
Well, I guess I know that this it's bad, but I guess he was able to kind of give some of these families some kind of closure.
Right.
Not saying what he done. I'm not trying to justify it by any means, but I am saying him drawing those pictures helped bring some closure to their family. So some of the families, so they at least know what happened.
Yeah. So a lot of these drawings revealed his intimate memory of the victim. So each one of these, that was basically his memories were the trophies for him. And he
Yeah.
gave a visual record of the women society had overlooked.
Why he confessed. Some say he wanted the recognition for his crimes. Others believed he enjoyed retelling his control over the victims. I can see both of those, wanting to get the glory for what he's done, but also wanting to say, hey, this is the trophy. This is what I did. Like
Hmm.
in his own mind, that's what he's doing.
Right.
But there's another angle to this. By the end of his life, he knew he was going to die in prison. And so maybe he felt like he just needed to talk about it, right?
Right. What else is he going to do at that point?
The power of DNA combined with the persistence of the cold case investigators and Little's confessions with his artwork really kind of helped, both evidence and, forcing America to kind of reckon with how many people, that may have slipped through the cracks that Little had murdered, basically just outright murdered. I don't know how else to say it.
Right. And it forced us to reckon with how many vulnerable women had slipped through the cracks.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
So we got investigations and victim identification. So, verifying confessions across the US. After he began confessing, the FBI and local law enforcement teams nationwide worked to cross reference his claims with unsolved murders. Investigators reviewed police reports, missing persons files, and cold case evidence that was often decades old, and who it depends really who was writing up these case reports, whether they gave a crap about finding these people's killers or not.
Yeah, or not even being detailed, and you still don't. Well, I guess at the time that they're going back and looking at this, you kind of have the database, but yeah, most I can imagine that if it was a sex worker or somebody, that was doing drugs, a drug addict, and a strangulation. Hey, this is an overdose. I'm just gonna fluff this report and put it into the thing and just going about my business.
Right. But that's where his confessions came in. His confessions included detailed locations, victim descriptions, crime scene specifics that only he would know.
So, man, that's crazy. So, confirmed murders and suspected victims. By 2020, investigators had confirmed over 60 murders just based on his confessions with supporting evidence. And many additional cases are strongly suspected, but they remain unconfirmed due to either missing or just degraded evidence over time.
Right.
And back to what you were talking about, those police reports that just may have been missing some of the details.
Returning the names to the Jane Does. So now these victims that have been forgotten about uh, are finally being known again and being found, and the family finally has closure. The major focus of the investigation was identifying the unknown victims. The drawings, sketches, and vivid recollections helped law enforcement match cold cases to real people. Um, and these efforts emphasized the humanity of victims, countering decades of marginalization.
Yeah, so, and as technology really evolved, DNA analysis started to kind of play a crucial role into linking Samuel Little to previously unsolved murders.
Hmm.
And then when we get to the databases like the CODIS, which allowed investigators to kind of compare old samples across state lines, because before they didn't really have that kind of technology.
Right.
And then, public appeals and social media. I mean, social media has its benefits too, right? It helped identify victims that were never found just by using the sketches and descriptions that were released by the FBI. Technology combined with the meticulous detective work really allowed investigators to kind of put Samuel Little's crimes into full scope.
Hmm. And so, what's the broader significance here? His case highlighted systemic gaps in law enforcement, especially for marginalized victims, and it also demonstrated how modern forensics and cross-jurisdiction collaboration can finally bring long-delayed justice.
If it had happened in today, it probably wouldn't have went on as long as it has because of the World Wide Web and,
And
for
because of CODIS.
just being connected. Like back then, we really weren't connected as much as we are now. It was a telephone. I know some of our listeners might remember the old rotary phone where you had to dial like nine and wait till it tick back over. But
Right, get to an operator.
Yeah, that's the kind of age that we're talking about he committed these murders in. Well, I mean, 2005, it starts to kind of,
That's definitely gone by 2005.
yeah, because 92, in 92, the World Wide Web was invented.
Right. And then, Google in 97.
Yahoo!
You've got mail.
Oh my gosh, AOL. I remember those days. Do you
But
remember did you have dial-up?
yes, yes.
We're gonna,
So
yeah, that's just,
the noise of dial-up. Okay, I can
it's
still hear
just,
it.
it's unmistakable. I can too. And you can forget about receiving a phone call when you're on the internet.
Oh man, I remember my mom getting so mad at my grandma for calling when she was finally got the computer to load.
Yeah, because it would take minutes, not like turn it on and there you are, boom. Yeah, no, it
No.
took minutes. Sometimes, well, where I lived, it would take at least 20 minutes to get that thing up and going.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
you can forget about searching like you did now, but
for sure.
anyway, if those investigators had some kind of technology like that, I don't think he would have invaded them as far as he did.
Evaded. Yeah. No, I agree.
Samuel Little died in December of 2020. He died at the age of 80, serving life in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And as we talked about at the time of his death, he had confessed to over 93 murders, but only really 60 have ever been confirmed. Even the 60 confirmed murders still makes him one of the most prolific known serial killers in the United States history.
Right. And so, how did he evade justice for so long? Um, it's decades long killing spree exposed the systemic blind spots, like we said. Crime spread across multiple states and jurisdictions. Many of the forgotten, overlooked women whose disappearances were not treated with urgency, and law enforcement often failed to connect similar cases due to lack of communication and incomplete records.
Yeah, so those really kind of writing it off as addict or a sex worker. And
Hmm.
so, Little's case really kind of highlights how societal and institutional biases can affect investigations.
Right,
Um, so, victims from these vulnerable communities were frequently dismissed or treated as less credible or not even credible at all.
right,
And the deaths were often unreported or underreported, and sometimes were misclassified as overdoses, accidents, and all of these biases, really helped Samuel Little operate undetected for decades, despite the over 100 times that he was arrested for those minor crimes.
right. So, what about the broader lessons for the criminal justice and society? Well, we have the importance of interstate communication and coordinated databases to track cross border criminals. Emphasis on valuing all victims equally, regardless of socioeconomic status, occupation, or lifestyle.
I was going to say today, I think investigators and law enforcement put a lot more emphasis on being detailed in their reports because of the criticism that they may have received for having those particular biases. I know in today's world, a lot of different law enforcement departments it trained their officers in bias awareness.
Right.
So we're not saying everything's going to be hunky dory and everything's good and golden because it only takes one
Clearly not.
yeah, it only takes one bad apple to ruin the barrel. But what I'm saying is, I think today's sometimes you have to go there to get here, and this is one of those things where we can learn a lot about it, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And then we have, the continuing efforts to solve cold cases. So you still have investigators out there that their sole job is to investigate cases that they could never solve. using the modern forensic tools, public engagement, and victim advocacy. Little Story at this point is a cautionary tale of these systemic failings and how it can enable prolonged violence and the moral responsibility to improve investigative practices.
Yeah, so as we kind of start to wrap up here, Samuel Little's legacy, it is horrifying. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It's horrifying, but it's also instructive. His story kind of really forces society, law enforcement, people in general to confront those blind spots in justice and the underscores that need, what am I looking for here? That needs persistence, vigilance, and empathy in protecting all classes of people, even the most vulnerable, right?
Right. So the final reflection here, Samuel Little may have been stopped by prison, but the lessons of his crimes about who we value and how we investigate must continue to shape justice long after his death.
Yeah, I mean, his story isn't just about a killer. It's about how the victims were overlooked and the justice system had blind spots. I think really the key takeaways for us here is Samuel Little's crimes weren't just the scale. It was really how long it took anyone to notice it.
Right. So, and this is really in remembrance of the victims rather than glorifying the killer, because it's really a shame that he went on to kill that many people over the period of time that he did across all these states.
Hey, that's a great call out, Kat. I think too, remembrance for the victims, definitely not glorifying any kind of serial killer. Absolutely not. I think I had a couple of takeaways here, how technology really helped law enforcement be able to bridge that gap between multi-states and be able to kind of use CODIS to be able to kind of, hey, I had this going on, this matches this, and fingerprints. I mean, now you can log into most police officers can log into a fingerprint database. I think really removing those biases on people that choose to live, an alternative lifestyle.
Yeah, you don't have to fit in a box to be cared about.
No, absolutely not. And I think that is the key takeaway from me, just anyway.
Love thy neighbor, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This was a good pick. I mean, yeah, I got a lot out of it. It was really kind of we told you at the top it was going to be a hard one, and it definitely was.
It was. There's a couple of different documentaries about it. Um, or maybe it's just one, but it's on a couple of different places. I watched the one that I watched on Stars, but there is one on Hulu as well, but it's called Confronting a Serial Killer. But I recommend it if you're interested, if you like the true crime business. If not, I'd skip it because it really is horrifying. But if you would like to support this podcast, tell a friend and help get the word out.
If you would like to help us keep the show going, you can do so at Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes.
William and I want to thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you.
Join the Facebook group at Info on the Go.
And on Facebook, you can share with us your show ideas.
Yeah, or ask us a question.
Hey, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and follow us wherever you get your podcast.
Send us a text using the link in the show notes or leave a review.
Yeah, it really helps others find us. And if you have a question or anything else, you can email us at,
Info on the Go podcast@gmail.com.
and yes, that is all one word. Till next time.
Stay curious.